It was about 1947 that a man named Art Hellyer came over the horizon. Art brought something different to radio. I always felt that, in a way, he was a kind of an early Ernie Kovacs.
In the days long before anybody said someone was irreverent, Art was irreverent.
Oh, everybody listened to his shows, sure.
I kind of equate Art to the Howard Stern of his time without the dirty sex talk, because Art was very creative. In a lot of cases, with some of the stations he worked at, he was a little too creative.
He never went over the edge into bad taste, never. Although bad taste enough for that time, I guess, to get him fired probably a dozen times.
What I was doing back in the late 40s and the early 50s, people would say, this man is shocking us with the things he says. I wasn't saying anything like Howard Stern or Don Imus or what's his name here in Chicago.
He would live on the edge, where most radio announcers were pretty darn careful. You couldn't say damn, you couldn't say brassiere, you couldn't say pregnant, and a good way to get yourself fired was to do anything a little blue.
And Art never did that. No, he was, we'd call him a clean comedian today.
Art Hellyer figured out a way how to be entertaining, how to be hilarious, how to be absolutely great and become a legend within those constrictions. And that is the thing that is his greatest triumph.
Here's that beautiful little gal stepping up to the microphone, our lovely lady of song. Here it is. Carol March. And I remember you, Carol.
I remember you. You're the one who made my dreams come true. A few kisses ago. I remember you. You're the one who said I love you too. I do, didn't you know? I remember too a distant bell and stars that fell like rain out of the blue.
Art Hellyer is an audacious man.
Art was ahead of his time.
He was a free spirit, let's face it.
He used to say it was Peck's bad boy. Art was Chicago's bad boy. And we all loved him for it.
Then I shall tell them I remember you.
Carol March, and I Remember You. Those first two songs do sound ominous. There'll be some changes made, and I remember you. I do want to tell the fellows in the front office here, the top brass, that 3 other companies are after me right now. The phone company, the light company, and the gas company.
Radio was still in its infancy when Art Hellyer Jr. was born on August 7, 1923, in a small Chicago apartment. Jazz was predominant, and the nation was going through a boom that wouldn't end until the Great Depression 6 years later. At 2 years old, Art discovered his parents' small crystal radio set and headphones, and a passion was born that would change the course of Chicago radio history.
When I was a little kid, I always dreamed of being a radio announcer or a baseball player. I wanted to be one or the other.
I grew up loving both. My dad, when I was a kid, bought me a PA system, and I used to put the speaker out on the roof of our house and play records, and then the police cars would pull up, and I would have to put an end to that.
I would transmit on radio frequencies, illegally of course, within the neighborhood. People would hear me coming in on the radios while they were listening to Young Winter Brown or Ma Perkins or something. What's this thing coming in? Who's that kid coming in here, you know?
But I also played baseball, and I organized the first American Legion League in DuPage County.
In high school, Art excelled at baseball, but was frequently ill. Throughout high school, Art battled various illnesses, including polio, measles, sunstroke, mononucleosis, mumps, chickenpox, and pneumonia, and he even missed his own graduation due to an emergency appendectomy. Art attended Loyola University until World War II ended his college education. Art enlisted in the Air Force and was stationed at Albuquerque, New Mexico. He became a meteorologist, but during those war years, he also found himself drawn to the microphone.
I was listening to KOB, the main station in downtown Albuquerque, and I thought, hey, I'm going down there and get a job. I'd never been on the air. So I went down and wrote that I'd been a child actor on radio shows in Chicago. I'd not been, of course. But I did get a job there, and I did all country western. They were called hillbilly shows. Even played my guitar and sang songs and that sort of thing.
Albuquerque Art, as he called himself on the radio, was also a star player for the 1945 National Championship Air Force baseball team. World War II ended and Art went home on furlough in 1945, returning to his parents' home in suburban Elmhurst. He went out one night on a double date with his best friend, who had with him a beautiful dark-haired lady named Elaine Miller. The two men, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 3 years, took their dates to the Edgewater Beach Hotel on Chicago's far north side to hear big band music. On the way home, Art told his own date that he would marry Elaine someday.
Rumors are flying that you've got me sighing, that I'm in a crazy kind of a daze, a lazy sort of a haze. When I go walking, I hear people talking. They say our affair is not just a passing phase.
And the couple soon became engaged.
There was a crossroads decision with Art Hellyer between baseball and broadcasting. Tell me about that.
Well, I did have tryouts, even with Connie Mack. I have a wonderful handwritten letter from Connie Mack at home. Philadelphia Athletics, of course. Cubs, White Sox. I had to make a decision. Was I going to go pro ball or not? And coming out of the Army at age 22, I decided I was too old to really start in the minor leagues.
It was then that Art's mother noticed an ad in the paper for the Radio Institute of Chicago and encouraged her son to enroll.
They had all top-notch radio people from Chicago who did the training. The chief announcer at CBS said to me when I was halfway through the first semester, "Don't take any more of this school. Get out of here." He said, "I have a friend down in Charleston, West Virginia, putting a station on the air January 1st. Just be down there New Year's Day to go on the air."
Art took a train to West Virginia, arriving just before midnight on New Year's Eve. And on New Year's Day, 1947, Art signed on the new WKNA, Charleston, West Virginia. Art soon established his personal style. He also established a precedent that would follow him throughout his career as he began to shock and amuse his listeners by teasing WKNA's very own sponsors. On a remote broadcast for a car dealer, for example, Art put the microphone in a trash can and made it sound like the cars he was advertising were falling apart. Art took a short vacation from the station to go back home and marry Elaine. The day after their wedding, Art and Elaine went to West Virginia, where he resumed his broadcasting career at WKNA. Elaine soon became pregnant. A few short weeks later, when Art identified the affiliate station as being part of ABC, the American Broad-Chasing Station, Charleston's personality station had had enough. He was immediately fired, and Art and Elaine went back to Elmhurst, where they lived with her parents. And Art wondered if his short career in radio was already over.
I was making, we didn't have tape, so I was making these big 16-inch discs and mailing them to stations.
But then WOWO in Fort Wayne, Indiana, was impressed by the wax demo record Art had sent them of his work on the air at WKNA, and they hired him for their 50,000-watt station.
We used to do 2 hours on the FM station down there in Fort Wayne at that time, each night. And we'd have to read from a book. Well, I was reading from Robinson Crusoe for 2 hours at night.
You were fired there.
Yeah, but let me tell you why. Because in Robinson Crusoe, I had him out with wild women out in the island and everything. And Friday had a band there, a big band. Oh, that whole, you know.
I wish we had 2 hours because there are so many great stories.
Art's revisionist storytelling was too much for WOWO's management.
Elaine and I had just been married. We're home August 7th on my birthday. I get a phone call from the station. Art Hellyer? I said, yes. The manager would like you in at 9 tomorrow morning instead of 5. I told my family and Elaine, hey, already? I've got a 9 to 5 shift. No more of this 3 mornings at 5 and 3 sign-offs. Well, it didn't work out that way. I got back there at 9 o'clock that morning, and Carl Vandegrift called me into his office. He said, get out of here as fast as you can. You don't work here anymore.
Art received the second firing of his young career. In early 1948, Art and Elaine's first child was born, and they moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Art had won an audition at radio station WMAW. Art was determined to keep this job, despite the low pay, and he took on additional work as a dishwasher to supplement his $25 per week radio pay. For a while, management and the station supported its talented, high-spirited young announcer. But an engineer who worked at the station kept moving Art's microphone.
So one day I did something absolutely terrible. I punched him out. He came down in a heap and I was fired instantly.
I think if he had been able to rein in his temperament occasionally, he could have done anything he wanted.
After his dismissal from WMAW, he signed on to WISN, another Milwaukee station, just in time to cover for the CBS station the 1948 presidential election in which Thomas Dewey nearly defeated Harry Truman. But on New Year's Day, 1949, WISN suddenly fired him for the unlikely reason that his wife and baby were waiting for him in the employee lounge. This incident did nothing to improve Art's already low opinion of station management.
We all get fired. We work for strange people in management who don't know what's going on in the business and have no conception of how the business should be run, and we get into trouble with them. They're a bunch of idiots.
He was always ready to pack up if it couldn't work out, and it didn't work out in many times because the radio station management could not understand. They really didn't have a handle on what he was doing. They couldn't understand the humor in the situation.
Even when he got fired, he didn't change his way any. So I think that probably one thing that he gave to his family was integrity and honesty.
Art had begun to build a large audience in Milwaukee and was quickly picked up by WMIL.
But I wanted to get back to Chicago for one major reason. I was born and brought up in Chicago. Our families were here, and this is where I wanted to be.
He began inundating Chicago radio stations with 50 to 60 postcards every week, including the powerhouse WCFL AM 1000.
I would send a card every day to Bob Platt, the program director, and all I would write is, help, save me, get me out of Milwaukee, and sign it Art Hellyer. Well, he had thrown out all the other audition information. The only guy he could remember was the guy he's getting these daily postal cards from.
It was 1950, and Art was about to begin the job that would catapult him to fame.
I'm very proud of this. When I took over that show, it had 0 in the ratings. It showed no listeners at all.
At only 26 years old, he was now the youngest radio personality in Chicago, and he looked forward to a long and comfortable career.
At that particular time, those who worked in radio and the leaders of radio knew that they were in a fight for their survival. Millions of Americans were fleeing the radio and heading to the living room to see this new thing called television. Radio became very strong at the local level.
To gain ratings in the new localized marketplace of the 50s, radio needed personality, and Art had plenty of that. WCFL AM 1000 was a powerful 50,000-watt station, and Art, crowned Chicago's morning madcap, was given the coveted morning show time slot.
Art Hellyer changed the way it was. Before Art, he had a nice low voice, but there were low voices who would say, and now Frank Sinatra singing blah, blah, blah. And everybody would go, forget it, who needs it? Or there were newscasters, and they were very stentorian and old-fashioned. He came on, WCFL came on, and suddenly it was fun. It was entertaining. It was something speaking to me at the time.
There's a little bit of counterculture to radio. When television came along, that's where all the money was going, the advertising was going there, all the hype was going to television. And so who was working in radio? You were looking for people that might have been a little bit out of the mainstream.
Art was really a personality. The music, while it was important, was really not the star of the program. Star of Art's program was Art Hellyer.
And here at the pier, at Navy Pier, at the Chicagoland Fair, friends, we have the WCFL dancing girls dancing for you now, back and forth on the stage in their lovely costumes. 89 girls, 88 costumes. Hi there, Adele.
Marty Hogan, our beloved general manager, WCFL, told me, and I have a note somewhere in the files back of me, Art, you are to have carte blanche with this show. The very first morning I did it, I was getting a phone call from him from New York at the Waldorf Astoria. What are you doing? I said, I'm carte blanching it. You told me to. So I was in trouble the very first morning with him, and he's in New York. One of his henchmen in the front office called him, of course.
Art would insult sponsors and management and walk a fine line between high ratings and losing his job.
A lot of the things that are being done today and have been done over the past several decades were initiated by him, as far as I know.
I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Art Hellyer is here this afternoon. We're going to spend the rest of our show chatting with this guy and playing some of the sounds of the great broadcast that he provided. Art,
You have more of these?
I have more saved.
Where did you get this?
This is called the blackmail.
We're supposed to play 3 commercials in the Robert Hall portion of the program, but we don't have time this morning, so we just chuck out the third one and forget all about it. Sure, we hear about it, we don't much care. That does it for Robert Hall on the Art Hellyer Show, that being me.
Oh, we're here for People's Pontiac. We're supposed to get 8 commercials, and we'll be lucky to get 2 for the clowns out there. People's Pontiac did a lot of television for them, and now they're just about going broke, so they're buying radio. Any of you people out there drive a Pontiac? Do you? I don't know why anybody would want to, really. People's Pontiac, where more people pick Pontiac as their car. I see that on television. Stand there with a straight face and lie for these people. Say, more people pick Pontiacs at People's than any other place in the world. 3150 Ogden, corner Ogden and Kedzie.
I think Art was the first announcer who ever used the sound of a flushing toilet on radio. In those days, this was really risque.
That was live John flushing. The people were gagging to while they were eating their breakfasts. Oh, we would get phone calls about that. How can that man do that sort of thing? We're having our breakfast. Well, that's why I did it.
The ratings skyrocketed, and WCFL's Morning Madcap was fast becoming famous. Billboards blanketed the city and suburbs, promoting Art's zany and unpredictable show to all of Chicagoland. This marked the first time radio had used this form of advertising. Record turners were employed to handle the technical aspect of playing music on radio.
It became obvious that live musicians were losing their jobs to recorded music. And so Petrillo and Local 10 negotiated a deal with the radio stations to hire ex-musicians to be record turners.
And WCFL insisted that Art be assigned only the best. That job went to an engineer and musician named Lenny Kaye. Art began calling him Dr. K, and the name stuck. They began an on-air partnership that lasted for 8 years and 3 stations, and a close friendship that lasted until Lenny's death in 1988.
He and Art began to work together on this early morning show. Lenny had a sense of humor that matched Art's, and together they would put strange sounds behind Art's comments.
88 degrees, and it is mighty hot. I don't know what the weather forecast is for tomorrow, but pardon me. Most distressing. I'm very sorry. I know it's highly offensive, but we're all human after all.
He had Lenny Kaye, who was a master at this, find a single word out of a record or a couple of lines out of a record, and would drop those lines in long before anybody ever heard of drop-in lines or wild voices and all of that sort of thing.
And the White House cleaner is the finest cleaner you'll find on the market today, anywhere in the country. I'll guarantee that. Oh, brother. I'm going to scrub my throat today with White House cleaner. See if I can get rid of this. What's the name of it? White House Cleaner.
He did it again.
Yeah, I did it again, the White House Cleaner spot.
The voices that people would pop in, Wally Phillips did it to great effect for many years. But the first time I heard that was Art, where these recorded voices from nowhere would suddenly pop into your ear, and with great comic effect.
Now today, Chuck, as you well know better than anyone, all the voice tracks are done by computer. Right. Back then, Lenny had 5 or 6 stacks of records, 78s, 45s, and 33s, and he'd wear white gloves so he could get right to them and handle them quickly. And I would say something like, my goodness, Mayor Daley just walked in here. And the next thing I know, I'd see him whipping through records. He would cue right to a line.
18 and a half minutes past 7, temperature 39 degrees.
Why do you say that to your sister?
I didn't say anything to my sister other than bon voyage.
Mes sisters, masseuse.
Really?
Art and Elaine had settled their family, now of 4, into a small home in Skokie.
I love it. That's built the way houses should be built, the junk they throw out today. Isn't that right, Herb? Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. Herb just moved into one.
And Elaine was pregnant again. Members of the American Federation of Radio Artists, later to become AFTRA with the addition of television, had just won the right to freelance, and Art, taking full advantage of his popularity, became perhaps the busiest freelancer in Chicago.
Probably the best freelancer you'd ever find. He worked for a long run of time at some stations. He was on WCFL or WLS-FM for a long time, but he worked all over the place.
You do not see freelancers in this business anymore. Freelancing was, there was a great deal of jeopardy to it because you weren't sure you were going to make a living at it, but if you did make a living, you could do better than the booth people could, than the studio people could in those days. I enjoyed the diversification of running from one station to another and sitting down at a different station. That'd be a challenge, if only to keep the call letters straight when I was sitting at the microphones on the various stations.
You're freelance on 7 radio stations, if I got the correct number.
At one time.
At one time, and 4 TV stations in Chicago.
WIND, WMAQ, WGN, WBBM, WCFL, WJJD. I would run from one state at WLS, run to each of those stations, leave them each the discs for the next day with my schedule. Then I would have to be on live throughout the day, too.
By 1953, scarcely 3 years after he'd been wondering where he would work next in Milwaukee, he had become the #1 radio personality in Chicago.
We talked about the crossroads of playing baseball and choosing broadcasting. You're back in baseball. You're broadcasting baseball.
Home games.
Who are you doing that with?
Bob Elson.
Yes.
But the schedule was brutal, and Art was ruled by the clock.
Dr. K, tell him what would happen some mornings at WCFL.
We'd get off the air and find that we have 30 more commercials to do.
That's right, and we'd run anywhere from 60 to 70 commercials a morning, and some mornings, because of the make goods, we'd be up in the 90s with commercials. And I remember a couple of mornings, we'd run them 3 at a time. Dr. K would run a line here, a line there, and they'd be coming out of the control room. I'd be doing them live. We'd run them 3 at a time. We'd call them commercial festivals.
When WEAW wanted to add him to their schedule, the only way they could was to set up a studio in Art's Skokie home, where he was joined by his wife, the lovely Elaine, for a daily show from their breakfast table. Art was working more than ever. At times, when career stresses overwhelmed him, Art and the family stole away to Elaine's parents' little cabin up in Eagle River, Wisconsin.
I'm Art Hellyer, and this is WCFL, Chicago 11.
What program is this anyhow?
I beg your pardon, I didn't hear what you said, sir.
What program is this anyhow?
What program is this anyhow? This is the Art Hellyer Show.
What program is this anyhow?
I said this is the Art Hellyer Show. For after-school snacks, serve refreshing Pepsi-Cola. It hits the spot with everyone, and then White House Cleaner removes that spot. Have a Pepsi-Cola. Want to remind you of the place to go for Christmas toys at gigantic discounts. Emico. Sounds like a disease, doesn't it? But they have some fantastic bargains, so. One thing we will not play on WCFL is rock and roll garbage or any of that stuff. We hate it. I refuse to play it. And whether Marv Gray is listening or not, I'm not going to read 8 or 10 commercials that long. Look at the length of these things. Look outside the window. That'd be a crime to have to listen to that much, wouldn't it? Would you people want to hear commercials that long? Throw them all away. There'll be no commercials at all tonight. Music.
But then it was back into the maelstrom and its ever-present double-edged sword. Station management liked the ratings their young disc jockey was generating, yet they were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the on-air antics which helped create those high ratings.
One day, Art was on the air, and he was talking about the rust that we get on bumpers in automobiles.
Well, that was 1955. Cadillac had just gone to the very, very large bumper overriders. Coca-Cola at the same time went to the king-size bottle of Coke.
He said, you know, there's the greatest product in the world to take rust off a bumper is Coca-Cola.
And we can now have this large bottle of Coke to pour on and rub on with a cloth to get the rust off the bumpers.
Coca-Cola was a sponsor on the station.
You know, you don't say that about Coke, you talk about how good it is to drink.
But Art wasn't content to leave it there. He went on to say,
if it cleans off the rust of the chrome in a car, you can imagine what it does in your stomach when you drink it.
There was nothing false about him. He probably thought that that's exactly, he wouldn't say it to be mean. He never said anything to be mean.
They were going to sue me for $1 million and this whole works and everything.
I think sponsors have a little bit more broad-minded attitude these days. Mm-hmm. I can say something about Coca-Cola that's not going to affect what anybody else says about Coca-Cola, and they realize at this point that it's only drawing attention to their product.
But in the mid-1950s, clients didn't always appreciate the attention.
4 young people died in a 1954 Oldsmobile on a curve at Johnsburg, Illinois. And I said on my morning show the next day, I've been after the car manufacturers for the last 4 or 5 years to put better suspension on the cars, to put better handling into the automobiles, to get rid of the sloppiness in cars, to put safety belts in the cars and to make people wear the safety belts in the automobiles. And what happened last night? 4 young lives were snuffed out at Johnsburg, Illinois in an Oldsmobile. And may the blood of those 4 young people be forever on the hands of Mr. Harlow Curtis, chairman of the board of General Motors Corporation, Detroit, Michigan.
Well, of course, General Motors immediately sued him for $1 million.
Marty Hogan was rushing into me before my show was over. Big lawsuit coming down the line from GM. What did you do now? And I told him.
Usually, people don't hear things firsthand, so that's usually the first step, is to get them to understand what you really said. And then after that, they don't really have any recourse anyway.
He said, you have a General Motors car? I said, I've got a Cadillac. He said, get over to Detroit in that Cadillac, take the right people out to lunch, do what you have to do, kill this lawsuit. So I did.
It was just another incident of his dropping into hot water. He was good at that.
And then Art's nearly 5-year run as WCFL's morning madcap at the top of the ratings charts came to an end with his firing after a live event remote broadcast.
You were saying before that you got bounced from WCFL in 1957.
July 12th.
Why?
I remember one time that Art was working at a radio station. They were doing a remote down at the old Navy Pier.
First National Bank had $1 million on display in a plastic container
in the middle of this kettle, and they had 2 armed guards, and Art was doing this remote.
So on that morning, Art went down to Navy Pier, and the guards wouldn't let him in.
And they wouldn't let us in.
You mean on Monday morning when you showed up, they said, we have no authorization for you to be here, we're not going to let you in?
Exactly. No way. So Monday I walked back to the studios, did the show in the studio.
And I mentioned that the idiots over there wouldn't allow us in, and not only that, I had an idiot for a boss, too, who would send me over there 6:30 to 9:30 to do a show when the place wasn't open anyhow.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the guards were alerted to the fact we were indeed to be there to do our radio program. Well, Friday, they had the Monday staff on again.
And Art said, I'm on the air, I'm doing a radio show. And the guard said, we're not letting anybody in here close to this money, that's our job to guard it.
So there was a bit of a discussion at the door.
And I suspect what he said about Navy Pier and the guards and the police would have burned the ceiling.
He just stepped over the barrier and said, let me stick my hand in this pot of money.
I did get in. Some glass was broken.
A couple of garbage cans were hurled. And just your usual morning show, group coming to work, you know. So they said no, we couldn't go in there. And next thing I know, some bird brain with a 1927 Thompson submachine gun comes up and points it at me. And he held that gun on my left shoulder. What he doesn't realize is that when he pulls the trigger, he won't even hit me. The thing will pull up.
And Art said, well, if that's the kind of guards they have at the First National Bank, I don't think you want people with that kind of intelligence guarding your money.
I went in, Ernie Notcher put us on the air. We were all shaky, I'll admit it. We were shaky with the fellow with the Thompson. And I went on and said he was standing there. I said, in all probability, he's protecting this $1 million display that shouldn't be put out here anyhow. Who of us in this day and age could even expect to attain $1 million?
He thought it was terrible that the First National Bank was creating the envy and the greed and the avarice of the public by showing all this money. Well, of course, they were all over him like a blanket for saying that.
And they announced there would be a $1 million lawsuit, $1 to match each dollar on display there. $1 million would be filed against the station, $1 million against Art Hellyer.
That cost Art his job at that radio station.
The next morning, there were reporters standing on our front door in Skokie wanting to know what happened. I remember a little ferret from the Chicago's American, the police reporter. So that was the story how I got canned. 1 week later, I was on WAIT in the morning doing the same morning show.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was the same hours?
Exactly.
Basically the same hours.
Exactly. Yeah. We enjoyed clobbering CFL. That was great sport.
You're listening to WAIT 820 Chicago.
The general manager of Chevrolet Motor Car Division says,
Station wagons, pardon me, currently are accounting for 16% of the total car output.
Thank you, Mr. Edward N. Cole, general manager of Chevrolet Motor Car Division. Hello, Mr. Cole. Nice having you with us today. Hi, Mr. Cole.
Hello?
Hello. Mr. Cole explains this upswing in wagon
Anybody
production.
home?
Yeah, we're right here. This is the Art Hellyer Show, and we're home right here at 188 West Randolph, the Randolph Tower, on the 30th floor. You know, it's delightful to look out the window, look down Randolph Street, be right here.
See all the wrecks?
See all the wrecks. Hello. Who's calling?
And now, a real treat for you. His Honor, the Mayor, Mayor Richard J. Daley, is about to lead the sewer workers here at the Southside Garbage Plant in song.
I work down a manhole with a guy named Bruce, and we are in charge of all the refuse.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we listen to the music of Guy Lumbago and his orchestra, the sweetest music this side of Hammond, we bid you farewell. Hey, you get the feeling that 1957 is really giving us one last blast. Old Man Winter, Old Man 1957 doesn't want to be forgotten, does he?
Art at that time was at WAIT, which was right down the street on, I think it was 188 West Randolph. And he had a morning program which was unique even to this day, and which was hilarious. I mean, you could fall out of your car laughing driving to work.
How long were you at WAIT then?
We were there 57, 58, 59, and then I said over the air one day, Elaine, pack the kids up, we're going on a trip. I announced that on my morning show. So I got home and we packed up and we just left. That was it. And
Well, had the station been given any notice on this that you were going to do that?
I said it on the air, didn't I? Didn't I say it on the air? What better notice is there?
Art took the family, now with 4 children, in their VW bus on a trip to the West Coast. Always working, though, Art sent tapes back daily to WAIT of their travels, including interviews with celebrities along the way.
Hey, remember that we're going to be with you each and every day, the Art Hellyer Show here on WAIT, no matter where we might be while we're making our tour. This is Art Hellyer, and we're seated in the front room of Spike Jones' home, right here in Beverly Hills, California. Let's attempt to do right now the Hungarian Rhapsody.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Spike Jones.
I love the show.
Don't lose your sense of humor. Self-explanatory.
Yeah, well, that's a show. If you ever lose your sense of humor, I think you stop living.
I said, I told you I'm in a jail cell. They have them out with the warden, but not with me. She says, oh, I'm sorry. Isn't that beautiful?
Funny, funny, funny. I'm not talking about myself, but this is Milton Berle. When I say funny, I'm talking about the Art Hellyer Show. And it's very, very funny. Listen every morning from 7 to 9:30 a.m. on WAIT.
From outward appearances, Art had it all, fame and fortune, but radio didn't pay much then.
Radio was never a high-pay field. Even today, the average person works for minimum wage in radio.
Many a time, you'd have to borrow money to pay your bill because we didn't have the money that people thought we had. We weren't starving to death, don't misunderstand me. But open that door and let me in the broadcasting business and let me stay there for life. This is what I asked at the age of 18. This is what you asked when you were coming down from Milwaukee or wherever it was you came from. And that's all we ask today, because that's where the fun is.
Art was completing a period of his life during which he had worked at as many as 7 radio and television stations at a time, and he had not had more than the occasional day off from work in 7 years. Fatigue and family pressure were beginning to take a toll on Art. He and Elaine now had 5 children, and Art was eager to take his career to the next higher level. One newspaper reported that Art had been offered a job in New York, a move that Art was working toward. In a letter to game show host Alan Ludden, Art wrote, "I don't wish to get into the ruts so many have gotten into here in Chicago. I have a wife and 5 children. I'm 35 years old, and if I don't blow this town now, I'm afraid I never will. Sincerely, Art Hellyer."
He had many, many chances to move to California, New York, but he is such a family person. He didn't want to leave parents behind, roots behind, so he chose to stay in Chicago.
He had a lot of opportunities to leave, but he did not want to leave his family, uproot his kids and his wife, or leave his parents and his in-laws. It was a very close family. So he chose not to take that track. So he knew the risks, and he knew that, there might be some downturns, and when you're staying just in one market and you can't skip around from market to market, your opportunities are limited.
There have been a couple of times where I've had to make sacrifices for my family. Staying in Chicago at one point was a sacrifice I made, although I'm glad that I did.
And now here he is, Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra and Marie.
Art's list of former stations was rising rapidly. The contradiction was implicit. The stations hired him to push to the edge, but the station managers felt the need to fire him when they felt he went too far. Art was perhaps the unwitting test pilot of what later would be termed shock radio.
My dad was definitely a forerunner of the shock jocks, no doubt about it. He did push management, he did push sponsors, he did do negative types of commercials. There were other people at that time that were similar to my father in trying to shatter convention. Henry Morgan in New York was one that comes to mind. Ernie Kovacs was also a radio announcer in the 50s that, he went on to television, comedy fame, and movie fame. But he was another one that would push convention. So yes, my dad would push convention. The one thing my dad did not do was, my dad never did obscenities. Okay, he never tried to gross people out. And he was never insulting to people. Maybe there was a hint that someone was overweight or something like that in some of his humor. But he was never a person that would come out and actually be vicious. So he might have laid some of the groundwork for some of the shock jocks up today, but he definitely was not of exactly the same mold.
He was a personality with wit and substance. I don't think he cared very much about ratings. He was never nasty, he was never mean, he was never snide.
In the mid-50s to maybe the early 60s, people were looking for a new way to reinvent radio. And that allowed individuals, like Dan Sorkin and Howard Miller and Art Hellyer to come along and use the medium, use their creativity to create connections with the audience.
Arthur Godfrey, I think, was the first guy who realized that radio was not a big mass of people out there, but one person, maybe Aunt Emma ironing. And he talked to that one person. And Art knew this as well. So it's always a very personal relationship he had with the listener.
As you know, his radio show was out of this world. And he really was the first disc jockey that really broke tradition. He was different. I'll say he was different.
Television, once seemingly the radio broadcaster's nemesis, was actually creating new jobs and opportunities for Art and other broadcasters.
It's in the name.
And now here's your host, Art Hellyer.
When Art Hellyer disappeared from the local airlanes last winter rather abruptly, a great hue and cry went up among his fans. Art never did explain. But he's back now as Master of Ceremonies on WGN-TV's word quiz game, It's in the Name. Hellyer used to appear on as many as 200 shows a week. He made upwards of $65,000 a year. But there were drawbacks. He was practically out of touch with his own family. When he got back, Hellyer decided that when he returned to broadcasting, a more fatherly and dignified approach would be better for the long haul. Some sponsors and agency people had come to regard him as too irresponsible and flip. So Hellyer has adopted a more serious approach to broadcasting.
Where does your husband work?
He's with Bell & Howell, the electronics division. They make tape recorders.
Sending one out to the house for that plug now, are you?
Well, I was
Mrs.
waiting
Sherman?
to hear that, but we'll see what we can do.
All right, do that. I like that nice big stereophonic console that Bell & Howell has. Bell & Howell.
Thank you
Next
very
week
much.
we'll mention RCA, Victor, and Dumont and everything else unless one comes out. I'd like you to meet our champion, Mrs. Trace here.
How do you do?
I want you to both go over to the boards now, if you will. Backs to the boards as we get ready to play our first game here on It's in the Name. Our champion, Mrs. Trace.
Some fans complain, though, that they miss the gentle irreverence that punctuated so many of his old shows.
Mayor Daley is a man with plans.
And adopting an even more serious demeanor, Art would do nightly news on Channel 7 for many years.
He had the sense that he loved to come to work and he loved to do his job. And his job took him into some awfully long hours over many years, sometimes starting real early in the morning at a radio station or a television studio, working far into the evening, sometimes after midnight.
Good evening. This is TV7's Chicago Report Midnight. I'm Art Hellyer. The ponderous, difficult, and costly task of implementing the Civil Rights Bill got underway today in a score of southern cities. Not long ago, Governor Wallace of Alabama pledged, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But Governor Wallace was wrong.
In time, he began to infuse even his newscasts with his personality and humor.
He oozed personality. I remember just when he was doing station breaks on ABC television that those station breaks had personality, which is something unusual for someone at that time doing staff announcing.
I will tell you this, that this gentleman apparently has been eating Mexican food. Listen.
Clint Eastwood is back, and he's burning at both ends.
In 1961, WBBM hired Art to give personality to their nightly supper club program, which featured a big band and popular singers. This was a dream come true for Art, who loved the music and enjoyed the live atmosphere.
Monday night, February 27th, 1961, and we're here once again in the Supper Club with music by Joe Vito and the orchestra, Bob Vegas, and Carol Marsh.
Well, I used to do a live show. You played it. You have a couple of the live half-hour shows I did with
with the Music Wagon.
Yeah,
the
Supper Club.
Supper Club.
Yeah, with the live orchestra and all. Hey, I always forget to give my name, though, at the opening of the show, and I take these tapes home for auditions, at other stations. So my name is Art Hellyer. We'll get that on the tape.
Art had been hired for the job with the caveat that he play the popular show straight.
He was his own man. You never told Art what to do. Never.
Here's Bob Vegas, and I don't like this title. It's ominous. There'll be some changes made.
For there's a change in the weather, there's a change in the sea.
This one night, they were 2 minutes short. So the producer runs into the studio to me, and he says, we're 2 minutes short. I said, I'll take care of it. So I ran down the hall to the newsroom, and I ripped off the first thing I could find on the news machine. And I went back, and for 2 minutes I read hog belly prices and filled the time.
There'll be some changes made.
He was fired the next day on the telephone, then was called again a day later and asked to return. This set up a career dilemma for Art, who had, immediately upon being fired, arranged a Channel 7 staff announcing job for himself.
Items to remember to put in resignation. WBBM hired me when I had reestablished myself, regained some of my former luster in this town, whereas WBKB hired me when I was at the bottom of the trash barrel selling Encyclopedia Britannica door to door. I was at the bottom, okay. But I do have to think about my family, and in particular about security. Elaine's taken a beating over the years. She's been kicked around an awful lot as I go from one job to another. All right, then the answer to that is to get a job that I know has some degree of permanency to it. The one here at WBBM, I have been assured of no permanency.
He continued doing the Channel 7 news at midnight.
That's TV7's Chicago Report, midnight. I'm Art Hellyer. Stay tuned now for the action movie, Act 2, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Good night.
And also was very busy with local and national commercials.
I can remember going on auditions for commercials. The client, most of the time, would like his approach. But he'd go in there, he'd take a script, and he'd read it, and okay, I'll read it. And he'd start reading it, and the client would say, but that isn't the script. I know, but this is much better the way it sounds. Needless to say, when the agency is paying creative people, they don't care to have anybody else be creative. Except some, in those days, some of the producers, because the producer would always be at the audition, would like it very much. And he was hired for his personality.
Christmas Eve, and I'm still wrapping packages. Elaine's been hinting about this for a month. Hope she likes it as much as I'm going to like our Christmas dinner. What a feast that'll be. Our entire dinner is like a present from National. And who could ask for more? Well, that's the last one. Not a bad job either. Now all we have to do is wait for St. Nick.
Your friends, the bakers of wholesome bread, wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Put the phone of the future in the palm of your hand. The cover of this week's Time magazine, out today, is a full-color photograph of House Speaker Sam Rayburn.
And of all the beers around, only Big D Breweries knows how to do it.
Mom's making Choco Scotch clusters from Kellogg's. Just send 50 cents on a box top from Kellogg's Sugar Frosted Flakes, or Sugar Pops, or Fruit Loops. Order your rescue copter from Kellogg's soon. Just turn to the classified pages of today's Sun-Times or Daily News.
Look at the problems. Look at the man. Look ahead. Elect Charles Percy your next senator.
TWA slashes the cost of your Los Angeles vacation.
This weekend, over most of these ABC stations.
In 1962, Art and Elaine moved the family to a larger house in a western suburb. They had 5 children, and even with all the freelancing, he needed to take on outside jobs again.
I opened the agency in '62, and it was shortly after that that someone requested Art Hellyer, and I introduced myself to him. Well, he had a name and reputation in this town before I even started. So to me, when I first met Art, I felt like asking for his autograph.
Art was still much in demand on both radio and television. But on December 31st, 1964, all that was going to change.
Here we are on State Street, that great street, right in front of Channel 7, WLS-TV. We've been in this building since its creation, virtually. Art Hellyer has gone through this door many, many times over the years. It's interesting, I think, that New Year's Eve is such a milestone in Art's long and illustrious career. We all know he did his first radio broadcast on New Year's Eve in 1947 in Charleston, West Virginia. It was 20 years later, just about a half a block from where I'm standing now, at State and Randolph, that he was injured during the broadcast of the New Year's Eve celebration of that year. I was the host of that particular program, standing atop the Walgreens drugstore. The wind chill was 20 degrees below zero. I'd only been here 4 or 5 months, and it was not a very nice assignment. As it turned out, it was a terrible assignment for Art.
There is a popular saying that if you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs, you just don't understand the situation. Well, in the case of those unfortunate broadcasters who have to cover New Year's Eve celebrations, that just isn't true. In fact, they sometimes are the only ones who do understand the situation. Take the case of Art Hellyer of WBKB Chicago, who was stationed on State Street as last midnight approached.
I got news for you. I'm never going to do this again. An hour ago...
New York had had theirs the hour earlier, of course. When it came midnight here, I was to be out in State Street on ground level. I was out there with the crowd. They estimated it at 200,000 people that night were at State Street. And I hear a fella say, while I'm talking in the microphone, I hear this voice say, "Get Art."
You're all wrong. It's not yet. An hour ago, you saw New York's crowd in Times Square, and now Chicago takes over for its moment of midnight glory.
And this young man came across in back of me. I later saw it on film to know that he was very nicely dressed, white shirt, suit, top coat, overcoat, that sort of thing. And he just let me have it in the upper back here and herniated a disc. Then as I fell into State Street, still talking, he gave me the knee and the lower spine and herniated 2 more discs, and those were the ones that almost crippled me for life.
He was seriously injured, and that was his last year as staff member here at Channel 7.
Yeah. The Loop always has its crowds, and this one's unbelievable here. In fact, I don't think we're going to get it back up there. We're right in the middle of a riot here. Happy New Year! Hey!
Backwards over a Corvette is where I ended up, between the State Lake Theater on the west side of State Street and the Chicago Theater on the east side of State Street, and that's the way we ended that particular remote.
And what they don't know is it isn't midnight yet.
But the new year did come, and I hope it's a good one for you.
Ron Cochran with the news has been brought to you by the ABC Television Network.
And I didn't see Art a lot after that New Year's Eve.
From then on, it was all sorts of hospitalizations, wheelchairs, crutches, the whole works.
For years, he was almost in a wheelchair, sometimes in a wheelchair, but he was in traction, constant back pain. He was out of work for a couple of years with back problems.
Yeah, the low points for me have more to do with when his back just would cause him to collapse. I mean, where he'd be in the garage yelling to have somebody help him into the house, and he'd be crawling.
It brought to an end that ability to sustain that sort of a schedule. I never could carry that type of schedule again.
He then went on to freelance after his recovery, and his broadcasting career took a whole different direction.
It's not yet!
The young man who punched Art in the back and neck was never identified, but he left his mark on Art for life.
And now Chicago takes over for its moment of midnight glory.
He sort of just left the picture. I cannot, it was so many years ago, I cannot recall why, but he just wasn't around.
I believe the worst part of my father's career is when he had to go the salesman jobs.
It seems to me there was a time he was only selling.
He even sold Encyclopedia Britannicas for a while, just to fill in.
I mean, he would go door to door selling, what was it? It was airline.
Admissions to airline travel academies or China dishes, door to door.
I saw him sell engraving, printing, houses, encyclopedias.
I didn't know that he did that, but I'll bet you if he did, he made a darn good living out of it. because he was such a person. Can you imagine opening your door and there stands Art Hellyer trying to sell you a fuller brush? But he sold a lot of them.
I got news for you. I made more money as a salesman and sales manager on the road than I made in radio or television. And then somebody would call me to come back to radio. Like an idiot, I'd go back to it because I wanted that challenge to do it again.
One of the saddest memories, and this happened on a daily basis, my dad lying in bed and one of us bringing his food up to him, and he'd just stay prone in bed and we'd just put his tray on his chest, and it would just, every time I did it, it made me sad, just thinking he's just lying there, just eating from the tray. I mean, it's not even like a normal human position to eat in.
Finally, Art was able to make a comeback, this time on a station based in suburban Oak Park, WOPA, and his show was called Memory Lane. The man who had challenged convention and torn up tradition now lamented an America gone by.
Yes, try to remember how cruelly sweet are the echoes that start when memory plays an old tune on the heart. Hi, this is Art Hellyer, and I hope that you'll enjoy our journey down memory lane.
The war in Vietnam had polarized the country. The 60s revolution was changing all parts of society. Youth was suddenly everything in the media. Art, once the kid of Chicago's airwaves, was now 44 and found himself on the other side of a youth movement that trusted no one over 30.
I think you have to set him in the context of the times, and the times were a-changing.
Art now found himself in the unfamiliar position of upholding the status quo.
Mrs. Gordon over in Franklin Park said, I don't care what anybody says. You haven't played the Tired American for a week now. Will you play it? All right, I will. For you fellas in Vietnam who are listening to this tape now, I've had some pretty good arguments these days with a number of station managers and program directors and all in the city of Chicago because they say patriotism is corny. Well, you fellas know that patriotism is anything but corny. I am a tired American. I'm tired of being called the ugly American. I'm tired of having the world panhandlers use my country as a whipping boy 365 days a year. I am a tired American who thanks a merciful Lord that he was so lucky to be born an American citizen, a nation under God, with truly mercy and justice for all.
You're in tune with Chicagoland's Memory Lane station, WOPA FM in Oak Park.
Through the late 60s, Art battled his bad back, financial hardship, and even a pie in the face at midnight on another Channel 7 New Year's Eve broadcast, as well as the changing times that left him wondering where he fit in.
After he had been out of the business for a while, he did call me and said he wanted to get back. And I told him a little bit how the picture had changed, how you needed a voice tape and all of those things now. And he said, well, he might get one. But I never heard from him after that.
The reason he didn't come and go to work for me, he told me, and we got right down to the point of, he was supposed to be there on one day and be on the air, and he didn't show up. And I called and said, Art, where the hell are you? And he said, Mal, he said, I cannot face an open microphone. So I think Art had a little psychological impasse somewhere about that time for whatever reason, that he was not comfortable being on the air.
Probably the times in the late 60s were the roughest times, when Dad was a victim to the changing formats and getting older in a youth-oriented market.
He was asked to narrate a song, and his latest comeback was underway.
Because MacArthur Park is melting in the dark, and all the sweet green icing is flowing down. Someone left the cake out in the rain. I will take my life into my hands and I will use it. I will win the worship in their eyes and I will lose it.
But soon Art would rise to the top once again.
Back in 1969, Art Hellyer worked for me in the last years of what was known WLS-FM in those days.
This is Art. Already, Harvey? We just came on. Already I've talked too much, Harvey? Right. Great start. I was just telling Rod McEwen here that I read from his books all the time, and you say it's easy. Just lie on your back, spread eagle, tip your head back, let go, gently now, smooth, floating past the fields.
This is Art Hellyer on
WLS-FM in Chicago 94.7.
Hey, we want to thank all you folks out there who've made us '1. By golly, you know, it's a great thing. You see the ratings? Art Hellyer Show, #1 with, 18 to 24, and, no, 18 to 34, and 35 to 49. Can't beat that, can you?
Then, in late 1969, WLS-FM went to an automated all-rock format.
Unfortunately, at WLS-FM, the parent company had decided to go with a syndicated rock format. That they decided that someone sold them a bill of goods that would be successful, even though WLS-FM was, at the time, the #1 rated FM station in Chicago and very successful.
We had been told that we would be through the following week, replaced by a rock and roll format from out of Cincinnati, Ohio, automated one.
All it takes through automation is 1 or 2, maybe 3 people in the entire United States to do that, and their job can be automated.
But there's nothing you can do to replicate what a personality, a good personality has, you know, the goodwill that he or she has built up over the years.
You can't format that, you can't pre-tape that. That's real, that's now, that's connectivity, that's radio.
I told Art, I said, please, you know, conduct yourself up to the last day, and what's like to do, but Art was Art. He couldn't help it, and then he went into the little bit of a tirade.
Well, I sprung it on the audience a week earlier and let them know that we'd all been canned and why.
I've always done that, you know, read the memos on the air, and you know, you get to the last line, it says, "Do not read on air." Oh.
I was accused of improper radio behavior and that sort of thing.
Dad, one day after a week of the 2-week notice, put on My Way by Frank Sinatra 6 times in a row.
Listen to these words, because this is my song. If you'll listen closely to them, I think you'll agree this is what I've done in the business here. I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this. Yes, I did it my way.
I heard the engineers had to carry him out and toss him out into the street at that point.
I was asked to relieve him of his duties.
Over the years, you have always kind of locked in with program directors and general managers of radio stations because I think you have always had a feeling that these people did not respect your ability and have a great regard for your talent as an entertainer, and they were always part of the establishment, and they wanted to have they were very stuffy and bottom line oriented and all of that sort of thing, and had no sense of humor, right?
Well, you said it all. I can't add a thing.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's the way you felt.
I think management wanted their cake, and they wanted to eat it too. They would want him to bring up their ratings, but then they would set the parameters that he had to stay within, and he would feel that he couldn't stay within, you know, these boundaries in order to do what they wanted, to be more popular, to be more successful, and to be himself. So I don't know. It was damned if you do, damned if you don't. Catch-22 type thing.
And everything that you said on the air, none of it was in poor taste.
I never said one dirty word. I never used one cuss word.
No, never anything
ever.
Like that. But you were just, you know, usually...
I would denigrate management.
That's right.
I always felt that I had been placed on this earth to puncture pomposity. I think that
I think that would explain it.
My dad was a real orator. I am not an orator as my dad was. My dad was very formal in everything, all his deliveries and everything. And I think that is the big thing in my life that made me informal, because I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to be totally informal, and it's gotten me in a lot of trouble, too.
Art, in a way, along with Arthur Godfrey, along with some of the other ad-lib people, began to open up the business. And it'll only be for those who come way down the line after us to determine, was this good? Was it not? I don't know.
During the 80s, Art's mellifluous tones were heard across the whole country on Stardust, part of the Satellite Music Network, ironically, an automated network, which allowed Art to reach 7 time zones. And while the drive was difficult for Art, the regimented format was worse. He switched over to Des Plaines-based WJJD and its Music of Your Life format. In 1991, after a year in semi-retirement, WJOL in Joliet made Art an offer he could not refuse. He was 68, and his back pain had become a fact of his life. WJOL invited Art to do a show that was entirely of his own choosing, and the station would set up a studio right in Art's home studio.
We're sitting here in your current studio, is that correct?
This has been, yes, and it's hard to believe I'm in my 10th year broadcasting on WJOL, and in my 4th year will start in this studio on August 13th.
So this studio also happens to be your bedroom, isn't that true?
Yes, that is very true.
How do you like the convenience of working right out of your own bedroom?
I think that I don't even have to answer that question.
Yeah, who wouldn't like that?
Right.
While the boundaries of mainstream radio have been stretched even further out over the years by the so-called shock jocks, Art, perhaps the original shock jock, has mellowed.
I've listened to him now on WJOL, and there's a mellowing in him that is quite appealing. And he puts together programs like no one else does today.
And if I ever lost you, how much would I cry?
In 1998, Art's wife of 51 years, the lovely Elaine, died.
How high is the sky?
Art, as always, talked to his listeners as though each one was a close friend, as he shared the painful experience of his loss. In an industry that has changed so drastically, it's hard to know what anyone's legacy is or will be.
And I think he made a substantial contribution to radio, the like of which we're not ever going to see again.
I have always maintained a real high regard for his talent and for his friendship, for our wonderful poker parties, and for the work that he and Lenny Kaye did in the early days of the disc jockey. He made a great mark on the industry.
You know, when I was younger, a lot like Art, when I was in my 20s, people were offering me this, that, and the other thing, and I didn't know what to do, or I thought radio was a stepping stone to something else, but I'm completely comfortable with just being on the radio.
I really think Dad misses the fame and the glory now. And he's in his final chapter, and he's still doing what he's always loved doing.
I think he's rattled cages, he's changed the way people look at things, he's enabled people to be a lot more creative on the air.
Some people kind of know him, know how he helped change things, but he's kind of invisible. He was a catalyst, but an invisible catalyst.
I don't think anybody really has a legacy in radio. No. What my dad, a lot of people, as long as they're alive, will have fond memories of a lot of the skits he did, a lot of the humor, a lot of the joy that he brought to them. People always will have their favorite things that he did on his radio show. He did maybe set the stage for some of the shock jocks today, no doubt about it.
People talk about you now, you know, they talk about what you do. Do they? I mean, I know I remember guys that I used to listen to and stuff that they did. I don't know. It's like, I guess your legacy is that you're like in everybody's head a little bit. Something you said that, you know, that they connected with is always going to be there. Which is, you know, it's not like having a big statue made for you or something, but it's kind of cool, you know.
This business needs all of the Art Hellyers it can get. Good luck, buddy.
I had just plain good fun on radio. I really loved it. I really loved it.
When asked how Art would address his radio audience if he knew it were to be for the last time.
For good? Yeah. Thanks to all the listeners who have stayed with me over the years. Thanks to my beloved wife who stayed with me through 51 years of the career. And my great kids who stayed with me through this amazing, mixed up broadcast career. Good night. God bless you.
When the circus leaves town, they leave behind a little bit of happiness and joy. When the circus leaves town, they spend their time providing fun, at least a laugh for everyone. Their extra special brand.
When my life is through and the angels